Today, we're going to talk about the top 3 mistakes that moms make in child custody. Now, let me just say at the outset, dads, you don't need to feel left out because your video is coming tomorrow and I'm going to call you out on the top 3 mistakes you make, okay? But as I'm working with clients, I do see this recurrence of sort of the common mistakes that we make as moms and as dads. They do vary a little bit, so I felt like maybe doing separate videos on these topics would be helpful. You know, part of learning not to repeat mistakes is just becoming aware, right? That's the first stage, is just becoming aware that you're doing something. And I think a lot of times the things we're doing, we have this view that it's what's best for our kids and that it's a good thing. But I think when I'm talking about these mistakes, I'm talking about things that the court views as not good, because you need to understand the difference. What we think is good as parenting isn't always good in the court's eyes. Before I tell you what the top 3 mistakes are for moms, let me just remind you, if you like the content and find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video. Also, subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. And as always, you know somebody that's struggling with this like you are, feel free to send them this video, share it on your social media. People need help around this stuff. And so many clients say to me, I haven't found anybody else that does what you do. It's really kind of a specialized niche. And so it is a lot of times information that we tumble across that we wish we'd found way sooner. And so help that friend of yours out and give it to them way sooner so that they can have a better outcome. All right, moms, today is your day. I'm going to call you out. And let me just say, I too am guilty of some of these. So I don't want you to feel like I'm saying that I've never done these things. I have, but because I've made those mistakes and learned what to do and what not to do, I can hopefully keep you from making some of the same mistakes that I did. The number one thing is, first and foremost, I think for every mom just about across the board, is that we tend to be reactive, right? We tend to be emotional. We tend to be a little bit hysterical. And I will say that if you're a mom that's been in a narcissistic relationship, understand that the toxicity of that relationship takes time to heal from. And so in the beginning, are you going to be more prone to those emotional reactions and that kind of more hysterical level of response? Yes, because of having dealt with the repeated verbal and emotional abuse that usually comes along with these types of narcissistic relationships. But that reactiveness and that level of emotion does not play well in front of the court or in front of experts in the case, such as custody evaluators, therapists, attorney for the children, those types of people. When you're emotional, it's almost like people shut down and they don't hear what you're saying. And I see this happen a lot in court, where people will kind of get worked up. They'll start going on. And a lot of times I've seen the judge just cut them off, because it's like, you know what? You're worked up. You're babbling. You're just going on and on. I can't absorb all the stuff that you're throwing at me. I talk about like making your judge or your attorney drink through a fire hose. I've talked about that some. And that's where this comes in. It's just like you're emotional, you're spilling your guts, and the court just cuts you off and doesn't listen to any of it. So what happens is you don't get to make your arguments that are important and relevant and all of those things, because you're trying to throw everything at the court because you're so emotional. And I think particularly if you are self-represented, you have to kind of put your attorney hat on in that situation and remove yourself as mom, and not look at yourself as mom, but look at yourself as an attorney representing mom. What would an attorney representing mom say? And that can help you to keep some of that in control. Okay. Now, if you have an attorney with you, that does help, because you kind of have that buffer to your emotions. But I do find that moms get frustrated when attorneys say, this doesn't work and that doesn't work. But they're not always explaining why. Okay. And I think that's where our frustration comes in a lot, because what seems, like to us advocating for our children, unfortunately comes through as emotional and hysterical and then doesn't get heard. So understanding not to be reactive and to get control of your emotions in the first instance is imperative. And one of the first things I tell clients to do with this is cut off contact with your narcissistic ex. That is the number one thing that you can do to help you start to get control of your emotions. Because if you're talking to this person or you're exchanging text messages with this person, you're going to be constantly being triggered, or if you're seeing this person in person for exchanges. And look, I know sometimes kids are little, you have infants, babies, whatever, where you can't completely eliminate those things, but we do need to minimize those things because otherwise you're being triggered over and over. It's making you more emotional, more reactive to their messages. A lot of times we make errors in that arena, and then those things are used against us down the road. So cutting off that contact and really kind of insulating yourself so that you can start to get control of your emotions is really, really critical to the success of your case. Next thing is, and I'm going to kind of talk about this from two sides of the coin. Okay. One is either buffering for the children, or on the flip side, giving the children too much control. So the way I see this play out is either we're trying to step up and advocate for the children. And I think this part happens when they're younger, like maybe 10 and under. And when we get to that 10 to 18 range, then it just becomes putting everything on the children and saying, whatever the kids want, it's up to the kids, it's their decision kind of thing. Okay. Now, if they're younger, we're usually trying to buffer and we're saying, the children feel upset. The children feel this way. The children feel that way. And as soon as you start saying how the children feel, the court or any expert is automatically going to feel like either you're enmeshed or that you're projecting your own feelings onto the children and that you're not really advocating for the children so much as you're trying to keep them from the other parent. That's a lot of what happens when we're buffering. And look, I know because when you live in that environment with that narcissistic person, that is what you do automatically for your kids, right? You're living in the household with this person. And I know for me, I was always trying to keep the kids quiet so he wouldn't be angry or, make sure that the kids were to bed on time so that he had time to relax without them interfering or making sure they weren't interrupting him when he was watching TV after a long day of work or whatever the triggers were that I knew that existed that were going to set him off and then cause him to get angry at the children and start yelling, screaming, or doing whatever and being verbally and emotionally abusive to them. So I did a lot of that buffering and a lot of that trying to control that environment. And so it's very natural after the breakup that we're still going to kind of try to do that for our kids to the extent that we can. The problem is that behavior is interpreted by the court as interfering in the other person's parenting. You have to really let go at that stage and go, you have to accept that you can't protect your kids from this at this point. This is why we say put the children in therapy. Number one thing you can do to protect your children and to protect yourself and to bring out the other person's behaviors is to put your children in therapy and let a therapist figure that out, because it's a third-party expert that's not you that can then speak to the issues of the abuse and the emotional treatment. Okay. But if you're being the buffer, you're going to be seen as the bad guy. And this is where I see moms get accused a lot of parental alienation. Now, the flip side of that of saying, oh, it's up to the kids, whatever they want to do, they can decide. Well, if they don't want to see you, that's on them and whatever. The problem with that is then you're accused of not supporting dad's parenting, right? So you need to make sure that you are encouraging the kids to go and to see them. This is your dad. He loves you. He wants time with you. Even if you don't believe that, I've had people that have to say it through gritted teeth. You still have to encourage them. And again, let the therapist and other experts deal with what's happening during dad's time. And also, that's how you kind of help your kids find their own voice. If you're constantly buffering for them and not making them go or telling dad that they don't want to go or whatever, they're not having to deal with dad directly. So one of the things I always said to my kids, one of my kids was 15 at the time of the divorce, and he would say, I don't want to go. And I would say, you need to talk to your dad about that. Okay. I couldn't be that buffer for him because then I'm accused of withholding the children or encouraging them not to go. But when we say it's all on the kids, it's not all on the kids. If your kids are 16 or 17, okay, maybe the decision is pretty much up to them, but you're still expected to encourage them and to support that relationship. And so you have to continue to do that, like I said, even if you're doing it through gritted teeth, until that child hits a point where they just sit down and cross their arms and say, hell no, I won't go. If your kid reaches that point, obviously that's next level and you're not going to be able to force the child physically to go. But you can't tell the child that they have the option to do that, right? Your message has to be, hey, it's your parenting time with your dad. You need to go. And I see people allow their 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old to opt out. And you can't do that. We had a client a few years ago who had a child around that age range, and the child wasn't wanting to go. And I said to her, you've got to drag that child, whatever it is, take away the cell phone, take away this, take away that. Whatever you got to do, you got to discipline your child in getting to that therapy appointment with dad. Because at that point, the child just had therapeutic visitation because things had fallen apart so bad in his relationship with his dad. So I said, look, you got to get the kid there. And then if the kid refuses to go or tells the therapist he's not going or whatever, then at least you have a third-party expert that is witnessing the child saying he's not going. And you can't be accused of it being you because you got him there. You got him to the appointment. You did your part. Okay. And that's your job, even when the children are older. Third and last is, I think a lot of times we want to control dad's parenting. And again, I think this is worse when the children are younger, or particularly like under 5, where it's like, well, you need to put them to bed at this time and you need to feed them these foods and you need to use this brand of lotion or this brand of, shampoo or whatever, trying to control it at that level. You don't get to control dad's parenting time at that level. I mean, if there's something that's really harming the child or that's a health risk or something, that's a different issue. If you have a child that's allergic to peanuts and dad's feeding them peanut butter or peanuts or whatever, okay, that becomes a safety issue, right? Because you're going to have a child that can't breathe that's being fed that. That's a problem. But just, you need to use this lotion because this is the brand of lotion I use. No, that does not work. Okay. And you're going to be seen as trying to alienate and do all those things because you're trying to control dad's parenting at a level that you're not really entitled to. You have to just let go. Look, dad's going to do one of two things. He's either going to step up to the plate and he's going to figure it out, or he's going to crash and burn. But by you trying to control all the different aspects, whether it's through the buffering behavior or whatever it's through, that really only prolongs the inevitable. All right. If dad's going to crash and burn, you're prolonging the point at which he's going to crash and burn. Just fully let go and let him take the wheel, so to speak. And then, like I said, he'll either step up or he won't. But if he doesn't, it'll be over a lot faster. Whereas your interference really only kind of shores things up just enough to keep him from actually crashing and burning, if that's what he's going to do. I hope these perspectives are helpful. Please try to recognize these in yourself if you're doing them, because they really are probably 3 of the most detrimental things that I see come up in cases that really can cause you to lose parenting time if you are engaging in an extreme level of these kinds of behaviors, or make you present poorly to those third-party experts like evaluators and therapists. So if you'd like more help around these types of issues and kind of figuring out what your weak spots are, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. There's also information on my premium one-on-one VIP coaching services if you have a more complex case or you really just want that high level of support because this is making you insane, then you'll be able to learn about that level as well. All right. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.